بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين وصلى اللهم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We seek His aid, we seek His assistance. Whosoever Allah Azza wa Jal guides, none can misguide. Whosoever Allah Azza wa Jal misguides, none can guide. I bear witness that none is right to be worshipped except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone without any partner. And I testify that Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam is his final prophet and messenger. Wallah alhamd, we gather once again to read a tremendous hadith from amongst the hadith of the messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam, of which the scholars have said that this hadith in of itself, it serves as a Hajj manual. And as we mentioned, today there are many Hajj manuals which are written clarifying the nusuk, the ritual of Hajj and Umrah. However, the Prophet ﷺ, as is confirmed in the authentic hadith, he told us to take our Hajj rituals from him. And so we don't deny what the scholars have mentioned with regards to Hajj and the rulings relating to Hajj and the various rituals. But we do say that it is important for the Muslim to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon basira, upon insight. And the one who does this is the one who seeks knowledge about the matters of the religion which affect them, like their purification, like their prayer, and likewise Hajj. And Hajj is from amongst the acts of worship which is only an obligation upon the Muslim, how many times? Once in their lifetime. So we only really get one shot at getting a Hajj which is described as being maqbool and mabrur. Na'am. So the best way to attain this is by seeking knowledge of the Hajj rituals. And in reality we've mentioned that the hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah, it is so comprehensive that whosoever studies this hadith, then he becomes, inshaAllah, he becomes a mufti with regards to Hajj. Because if he ever goes on Hajj, inshaAllah, and masail come up, questions come up during Hajj, bi'idhnillah, I will be able to respond to these questions, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Taib, so last week we ended on the point wherein we mentioned the conditions of Hajj, yani upon who is Hajj an obligation, and also the issue concerning is Hajj an obligation upon us immediately or can it be delayed? And we said according to that which is correct is that Hajj is an obligation fawran, meaning immediately. Because it is something, it's a right which belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so to free yourself from this obligation is better than to delay it. And we said one of the proofs the ulama use to prove that it is an obligation immediately is that if the person who is mustati'an, the person who is by the means to undertake Hajj, and he delays the Hajj, and then he passes on, the scholars have mentioned that he dies sinful. He dies sinful. And if he has any money in his estate, the first thing that must be done is money must be taken and allocated for Hajj, and Hajj must be performed on behalf of this person. And this shows us, yani, the tremendous nature of this obligation of Hajj. Na'am. We continue inshallah. Jabir ibn Abdullah then said, فخرجنا معه حتى أتينا ذا الحليفة فولدت أسماء بنت عميس محمد ابن أبي بكر فأرسلت إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كيف أصنع؟ قال اغسلي واستثفري بثوب وأحرمي. So your issue comes up, and that is the issue concerning the mawaqit. And what is the mawaqit? It is the designated stations which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made points for whomsoever passes over it to assume the ihram from. Na'am. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the authentic hadith, Hunna lahunna wa liman ata alayhinna min ghayri ahlihinna liman arada al-hajja aw al-umrah. The Prophet said these designated points are for the people who live in its vicinity. وَلِمَنْ أَتَى عَلَيْهِنَّ, and whomsoever passes over them, لِمَنْ أَرَادَ الْحَجَّ أَوْ الْأُمْرَةِ, whomsoever intends to perform Hajj or Umrah. Meaning that your intention must be assumed from these designated miqat, designated points. Type. And so the miqats are of two types. It is the miqat, the designated point that relates to place, and the second type of miqat is the miqat which designates to time. So the miqat of place we will discuss inshallah. The miqat of time means that you must do certain rituals within Hajj in a specific time period and time frame. Such as, for example, being on Arafah. Naam. That being on Arafah from the time of Dhuhr, just before Dhuhr, up until sunset. If a person misses it, right, for an invalid excuse, then they've missed on Arafah. They cannot go to Arafah on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah and then do the rituals of the day of Arafah then. It is a specific time period. Type. Just like there's other specific time periods, for example, with regard to pelting and the like. So, Jabir said, we went with the Prophet ﷺ up until we came to Dhul Hulayfa. And Dhul Hulayfa is also known as Bir al-Ali. Right? So to say, the Bir of Sayyidina Ali. And this is one of the closest miqats to the people of Medina, but it is the miqat which is the most distant from Makkah. It's about 420 kilometers from Makkah. So it's the miqat which is the most distant. And the mawaqit which is established in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, there is 4 mawaqit. The first being Dhul Hulayfa. So inshallah, must write this down, right? And Dhul Hulayfa is for the people of Medina, right? The people of Medina. The second miqat is Juhfa. And Juhfa is a qarya. It's an area which is an old area found upon a road between Makkah and Medina. Right, and this is the second miqat. And this miqat is the miqat for the people of Sham. So what are the people of Sham? Syria, Palestine, what is referred to as the Levant. Right, this is the miqat for the people of Asham. It is called Juhfa. The third miqat, it is Qarn. Right, Qarn. And it's also called Qarn al-Manazil. Qarn al-Manazil. And this miqat is for the people of, Dhatu Irq is for the people of Iraq. But this, some scholars have said this is also for the people of Iraq. Qarn al-Manazil. This is the third miqat. And this miqat, it is closest to Ta'if. It is closest to Ta'if. And the fourth miqat is the miqat known as Yalamlam. Yalamlam is for the people of Cape Town, the people of Yemen. Right? So these 4 miqat, it is established in the Sunnah. It is established in the Sunnah that these are mawaqit, designated points that whosoever wants to perform Hajj and Umrah must assume the ihram from this point. As for the 5th miqat, then the 5th miqat is Dhatu Irq, which is for the people of Iraq. And some scholars have mentioned that this miqat, it is ijtihadiyah. It was the ijtihad of Umar ibn al-Khattab to designate this as an area. Some scholars have said it is also established in the Sunnah. And that which Shaykh Abdullah al-Fawzan has mentioned is that it is established in the Sunnah. And when Umar ibn Khattab designated it as a miqat, he did ijtihad. But he said, asaba fi ijtihadi, that he was correct with regards to his ijtihad. Just like Umar ibn Khattab many times, he made claims based upon his knowledge, and then the wahi confirmed it. So Umar ibn Khattab was not aware that the Prophet designated this as an miqat. He did ijtihad, but his ijtihad was confirmed by the Sunnah. So these mawaqit, For whomsoever intends to perform Hajj and Umrah, they must then intend from that specific point. And it is not permissible to assume your ihram. And when we say ihram, what are we referring to? The state. Are we referring to the niyyah? Because commonly people think that ihram refers to the clothing. You can wear the clothing of a muhrim, but it doesn't mean you're in a state of ihram. And the next mas'ala will clarify this. You're only in a state of ihram once you profess your niyyah. Right? Once you make your niyyah. So the next mas'ala which comes up is if a person, for example, passes by these mawaqit, these designated stations, by way of plane, how does he then assume his intention? Because the Prophet said these designated points are for the people who live there or whosoever pass over there, whoever wants to perform Hajj and Umrah. So can the person then make the intention in the sky? Yes. And the Prophet even said, وَمَنْ أَتَى عَلَيْهِ, and whosoever passes over it. So whosoever passes over any of these areas, and you come from that direction of this miqat, you will assume ihram from that point, even if it is in the air. And also with regards to people who live in areas which is the same distance as the miqat, must they go to that specific miqat or can they assume it from an area close by? The scholars have mentioned that if the area is similar in distance, they will assume it from that area. So, the issue concerning assuming ihram when you come into Makkah by plane, and this is the common issue that comes up, is that when people perform Hajj and Umrah and they have a direct flight from Johannesburg or wherever into Jeddah, when you arrive in Jeddah, you're already considered to be within the precincts of the Haram. So that means you must have already assumed your ihram in the plane or on the plane. And so this issue will come up later when we talk about the preparation for ihram. Taib. So they mentioned that we came to Dhul Hulayfa, فَوَلَدَتْ Asma bint Umays, Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. That Asma bint Umays, radiallahu anha, she gave birth to Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. And Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr was the son of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. But who was Asma bint Umays? Asma bint Umays was from amongst the Sabiqeen ila al-Islam. She was from amongst the Sahabiyat who were the foremost to embrace Islam. And she was from amongst the group of Muslims who migrated to Habasha. And we know there was, how many hijrahs took place in Islam? 3? Naam. So where was the first hijrah to? To Abyssinia. The scholars have differed. Some have said 2, some have said 3. But that which is correct, Allahu Alam, is that there were 3 hijrahs, right, that the Muslims performed. The first was in the beginning of the affair when Islam was oppressed in Makkah and people couldn't manifest their Islam. And the Prophet also heard of a just king in the lands of Abyssinia. And the Prophet also said the Muslims must migrate there. Why? Because they could practice their religion openly there. And from amongst the group who made hijrah was Asma bint Umays, radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And she was the wife of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. She was the wife of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. And they mentioned that when Ja'far ibn Abi Talib was martyred in the Battle of Mu'tah, she then married Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And she gave birth to Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. And when Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu passed on, she is the one who performed ghusl upon him. And then thereafter, she married Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So today, if a lady was to do this, how would she be looked at? You with me? But this was something which was very common amongst the Sahaba. That one Sahabi would pass on, and then another Sahabi who was the friend of that, they were all companions, would then propose. And it wasn't something which was considered to be frowned upon. So something which was common practice. So she married Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, and when he was martyred, she married Abu Bakr ibn Abu Bakr, passed on, she married Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala an. So, the scholars mention that the question was imposed to the Prophet ﷺ. And the question was asked, Kaifa asna? What should I do? Because she gave birth at the miqat. And once a lady gives birth, she's in a state of nifas, postnatal bleeding. So the issue comes up here, and that is, does nifas prevent a lady from entering into a state of ihram? Likewise, we take it also with regards to haid, that a lady might, for example, get a haid. It happens whilst on Hajj. But even if she, for example, went to Medina first, spent a couple of days in Medina, and then went to the miqat, made an intention for Hajj, right? And then before that she got a haid. What is upon the lady? Can the lady enter into the ritual of ihram while she is in haid? The answer is yes. Because the Prophet ﷺ told her that she was to perform a ghusl. And in this hadith there is an evidence that ikhtisal, that performing a ghusl for the lady who is in a state of postnatal bleeding, for ihram it is sunnah. Right? And here she is not bathing herself for the sake of attaining a state of purification. Because she cannot be considered to be tahira. She can't be considered to be in a state of purity that enables her to pray, and enables her to read the Quran, and enables her to perform tawaf. But she performs this for the sake of entering into a state of cleanliness. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ advised her with. This is what the Prophet ﷺ advised her with. Likewise, also, the menstruating female. When this happened to Sayyidina Aisha, when she performed her umrah, and before she completed her ritual, she then got a haid. And the Prophet said to her, Inna hadha amrun kataba Allahu ala banat Adam. Faghsili thumma ahalli bil hajj. The Prophet then said that this is something that Allah Azza wa Jalla has written upon the daughters of the son of Adam. It's something which is natural. Faghsili, so perform ghusl, thumma ahilli bil hajj, and then profess the intention for hajj. They profess the intention for hajj. So here the Prophet also commanded the menstruating females to perform a ghusl. And we say the ghusl is not to lift the state of impurity, so to say, but rather it is for the sake of cleanliness. And here the scholars have then differed with regards to the ruling on whether the lady must perform ghusl or not. The Zahiriyah, and every year the Zahiriyah, it is the madhab that is considered to be literalist. That whatever commands come, they say these commands is to be taken upon the apparent. Whatever commands come, it is to be taken upon the apparent. So the Prophet also told Asma bint Humais, Waghsili, right? You must perform ghusl, it's a command. So they say it is wajib for the lady who is in nifas and the lady who has haid to perform a ghusl to enter into a state of ihram. However, we know, generally speaking, that if a person enters into the ritual of Umrah or Hajj, is taking a ghusl something which is wajib, or is it something which is recommended? Wajib. Jumhurul ulama have said that it is something which is recommended. which means that with regard to Hajj and Umrah, there are certain pillars, like all ibadat have pillars, and there's certain wajibat. And in order for the ibadah to be accepted, the pillars must be fulfilled and the wajibat must also be fulfilled. But no scholars have ever listed that ghusl is from the pillars of Hajj or the pillars of Umrah. It is recommended, and this is the opinion of majority of the scholars. So they say that if it is not obligatory for the person who is not in the state of Haid, right, to perform ghusl, then min bab awla is not also wajib for the women who are in the state to perform ghusl. Allahu a'lam. Umar ibn Khattab said, or rather Abdullah ibn Umar said, من السنة أن يغتسل الرجل إذا أراد أن يحرم وإذا أراد أن يدخل مكة. Right? Ibn Umar said that from the sunnah is to perform ghusl when the person intends to enter into a state of ihram. وَإِذَا أَرَادَ أَن يَدْخُلْ مَكَّةَ, and also when the person intends to enter Makkah. Because there's certain times, of course, as we know, when ghusl is wajib. Who can tell me when the ghusl is wajib? If you're in a state of janaba, type. Any other times? Wet dream? No. Those are instances where ghusl is wajib. For a lady also, when she is purified from menses, she must perform ghusl. Likewise, the lady who is in a state of postnatal bleeding. So here, when this Sahabi mentioned from the Sunnah, meaning that it is something recommended. That from the Sunnah is to perform ghusl when entering into state of ihram. Because from the Sunnah is also to perform a ghusl before you enter into Makkah. But because the Sunnah is difficult to attain, very few people practice upon this. And the Prophet also, before he entered into Makkah, he would stop at a certain place and he would perform ghusl. Why? Out of sanctity of entering Makkah. But the Sunnah is not a Sunnah which is practiced upon. It's a Sunnah which is considered to be mahjura, because we don't stop at that specific area. So, the ruling on performing ghusl for ihram is that it is sunnah. Likewise, with regards to the lady who menstruates, it is not wajib, it is sunnah. And here, Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan has mentioned the issue, and that is, what is the ruling on performing tayammum for the one who cannot find water? So when the tayammum is legislated, when? Inda faqtil ma, when water is not found. So can we say now in this instance, because the person doesn't have access to water, and also Shaykh Abdullah Fawzan says that if it is, for example, winter, and it's very, very cold, and the person cannot find, for example, hot water, but today this problem is solved, right? He says, فَهَلْ يُسْتَحَبُّ لَهُ أَن يَتَيَمَّمْ. Is it then recommended for this person to perform tayammum, to enter into ihram? And he says that the scholars have differed with regards to the issue, and they have two opinions. The first is that they say it is not recommended. And this is the opinion of the Hanafis and the Malikis. They say it is not recommended. They say because ghusl, when you perform ghusl, what you intend behind ghusl, it is to clean yourself and to rid yourself of any bad smells. And they say, and this is not attained by way of tayammum. It is not attained by tayammum. The second opinion is that it is recommended for the one who cannot find water or the one who cannot use water. And this is the opinion of the Shafi'is and also one of the opinions from the Hanabila. But that which is correct is that it is not recommended. That if you can't find water to perform ghusl, to enter into a state of ihram, then it is not recommended for you to perform tayammum. Right? It is not recommended to perform tayammum. طيب. Then Jabir said, رضي الله تعالى عنه, فصلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في المسجد. The Prophet ﷺ then performed salah in the masjid. So before this, the Prophet ﷺ performed a ghusl. And then the Prophet ﷺ prayed in the masjid. And what is meant by masjid in the context of the hadith? It is the masjid at Dhul Hulayfa. He prayed at this masjid. And this is the first issue which is mentioned here. The second issue is Jabir ibn Abdullah did not mention which salah the Prophet also prayed. And for this reason, the scholars differed. Some scholars said it was Dhuhr. And that Abdullah Fawzan said that this is the correct opinion. That the salah which the Prophet prayed, it was Dhuhr. The next issue which comes up here is it sunnah to pray salah, then assume your ihram? Meaning, is there 2 raka'at sunnah for ihram? Ashraf says yes. Ridwan? Ridwan says yes. So Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah says, لم ينقل عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه صلى للإحرام ركعتين غير فرض الظهر or غير فرض الظهر. That it has not been transmitted from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم that he prayed any specific salah for ihram other than the salah of dhuhr. Right? And from this we derive that it is better for the muhrim, for the person who is now going to intend to enter into a state of ihram, that he enters into a state of ihram after an obligatory prayer. Why? Out of following the Prophet ﷺ and following his Sahaba. And this is a point of agreement amongst the scholars. لكن إن لم يوافق إحرامه وقت الفريضة فهل يصلي للإحرام. However, in the event the person's time when he intends to go into a state of ihram does not coincide with a time of an obligatory prayer, is it then sunnah for the person to pray 2 raka'ats? And some of the scholars have taken the opinion that there is no specific salah for ihram, right? And this is the opinion of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and the opinion of his student Ibn al-Qayyim. Ibn al-Qayyim said it has not been reported from the Prophet that he performed 2 raka'ats for ihram other than the obligatory prayer. And they say Shaykh al-Islam has another opinion as well. So Jumhur ulama have said that it is 2 raka'ats sunnah, right? But that which the evidence indicates towards is that the Prophet also never ever performed 2 raka'ats separately to go into a state of ihram. Rather, what he did, alayhi salatu wasalam, was if he assumed his ihram and it coincided with the time of salah, he would first pray that salah, then he would assume his ihram. Mm-hmm. Remember, there's no virtue in actually praying in that masjid, right? There's no specific virtue in praying in that masjid. But, mathalan, you go in and you perform 2 raka'ats for the sake of tahiyatul masjid, then you assume ihram after that. But there's no specific salah for ihram. That's what we're mentioning here. There's no specific salah which is designated for you to pray to enter into a state of ihram. The Prophet's sunnah was to pray a prayer which coincided with the waqt, and then he would assume his ihram. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Taib. Another issue which comes up here is that if a person assumes his ihram before the miqat, is his ihram considered to be correct? Yep. Sure. That would be correct. Because there's no specific prayer. You with me? The Prophet ﷺ, which is reported in the hadith of Jabir, is he prayed a prayer. Which prayer was it? Some scholars mention was Dhuhr. And then he assumed his ihram. So even if you just passed by the miqat, and you had your intention, and you also manifested the ritual you're performing by saying Labbaik Allahumma umratan or hajjan, khalas. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Correct. Because we said whoever passes over these areas already or close by to the miqat, they assume it from that position. So likewise the people who are in the plane, when they make an announcement, right, they make the announcement that you are going to be approaching the miqat. And whoever has intended to perform umrah or hajj must make the intention. Make your intention from that point. Naam. So here the issue comes up is it recommended to make your intention before the miqat? Like someone says, mathalan, and this is something common amongst the Sufis, is that they say they want to assume the ihram from the masjid of the Prophet at the qabr of the Prophet. Okay? You can't do this. And this is something which occurred even in the time of, I think, Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala. And the person said that he wishes to intend his ihram from the qabr of the Prophet. And Imam Malik then rebuked him for this. Right? He said, well, it is only a couple of steps that I am increasing upon, because the miqat is about 40 kilometers or so from Medina. And so Imam Malik rahimahullah rebuked him for this. Why? Because the Prophet also, and his Sahaba never ever did this. So why they invent something which they did not do? The Prophet assumed his ihram from the miqat. So if the person was to assume his ihram from before the miqat, out of precaution, then it is something which is permissible. Like when you're in the plane, they announce it. If they announce it, by the time they announce it, it's very close. By the time the announcement is finished, you pass the miqat. And if you pass the miqat and you didn't make your intention, what is upon the person? They must go back, right? They can't slaughter. You must go back, right? There's no dump for them. They must go back to the miqat. Even, for example, the person who didn't have the clothing of ihram on, and he made his intention is accepted, right? He can always change his clothing. He gives a dam for that. But the person who didn't make his intention from the miqat, he must go back to the miqat. So if you missed out on this in the plane, you must go back. Not to the plane, but back to the closest miqat, right? So if the person did this out of precaution, this is what happens on the plane. Is they mention it before the time. And you said it before the time. Then in this event, your ihram is correct. Because you did it out of precaution. Naam. Mm-hmm. Well, it's upon the person firstly to know that he's traveling and he must make his intention. But a couple of years ago, I don't know if Noor can also confirm, on Ethiopia, they do all flights always make this announcement. Maybe sometimes they can miss it. But in the event that they don't make the announcement and the person doesn't know the distance, you can firstly work out the distance. How long does it take to get to Makkah from where he is? So it's maybe say, Allahu Alam, 4-hour flight. Like I said, 2 hours in you reach Makkah, right? So then when you reach that point, you can say by 2 hours you'll make your intention at that time. But if the person made the intention in this event beforehand, it is accepted. Why? Because out of the situation that they find themselves in. Naam. Taib. The next issue which comes up is the issue concerning ishtirat in the ihram. And what does this mean? This means stipulating a condition when entering into a state of ihram. Now the question we have here, is this something which is sunnah and recommended, or is it something which is only recommended in a certain circumstance? So what does ishtirat mean? Ishtirat means that placing a condition that in the event something happens to you whilst you are in a state of ihram, in habisun, if anything keeps me back from performing my rituals, then my point of exit of my ihram is from wherever I'm held back. So is it sunnah to make this condition when you go into ihram, or is it only sunnah in certain circumstances? Because there were certain sahabiyat who were ill, and they feared that the illness would prevent them from completing their rituals. They came to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ told them to make ishtirat. Right? So, ishtirat is not sunnah at all times. Right? However, ishtirat, it is recommended for the person who fears that they will be unable to complete their rituals. So that means that in the event they can't complete their rituals, they come out of the ihram, and there's nothing which is upon them. But if the person didn't make this ishtirat, then there's certain repercussions that comes about. So the scholars have mentioned is that in the event the person has a real fear that they will not be able to complete the Hajj. Like for example, there's a war, and now the war breaks out. You withheld from entering, for example, Makkah. This is something which is beyond your control. In this instance, you will make a condition. Likewise, if the person is also ill and they have a chronic illness and they fear the illness will overtake them, they make this condition. But it's not generally a sunnah that a person must make when entering into ihram. Jabir ibn Abdullah then said, ثُمَّ رَقِبَ الْقَصْوَ حَتَّى إِذَا اسْتَوَتْ بِهِ نَاقَتُهُ عَلَى الْبَيْضَاءِ نَظَرْتُ إِلَى مَدِّ بَصَرِي بَيْنَ يَدَيْ مِنْ رَاكِبٍ وَمَاشٍ. Jabir then said, then the Prophet ﷺ, he got onto his camel. And the Prophet's camel, it was named Qaswa. Hatta idha stawat bihi. Up until the camel was erect. Up until the camel was erect. It stood erect with him on its back at Al-Bayda. And then Jabir said, Nadartu ila maddi basari. And I saw for as far as my eye could see in front of me. But riders and pedestrians, and also on my right and my left, and behind me like this. So we mentioned previously that this referred to the great amount of Sahaba who accompanied the Prophet ﷺ on this journey of the Prophet ﷺ's farewell Hajj. And the scholars differed with regards to the number. Some said 90,000, some said excess of 100,000. But it was a great number. As Jabir ibn Abdullah describes it, he says, I looked for as far as my eye could see. And in the front of the Prophet, and behind me, and on the right and the left, I saw riders and I saw people walking. Right? I saw riders and I saw people walking. So another issue that the scholars mention with regards to this is that this is an evidence for those who say that the Prophet ﷺ ahalla min al-Bayda. And Bayda was basically like an area close to Dhul Hulayfa. At this point, the Prophet ﷺ, he basically said the talbiyah. And he said, Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. And other scholars said, he said, Labbaik Allahumma hajjan. He said, oh Allah, yeah, I am to perform Hajj. And the Prophet did not say this out of talaffuz bin niyyah, out of uttering the niyyah, right? But he did this out of manifesting the type of ritual he was going to do. So for this reason, the scholars say, some scholars say it is recommended that when the person is on the ride, like the Prophet was on his ride and his ride was erect, the camel. For us, for example, once you're on the bus and you're sitting, it is recommended for the person to say, Labbaik Allahumma umratan wa hajjan. Or whatever nusuk you're going to enter in. As we know, there's different types of Hajj. What do we mean by this? There's one Hajj ritual, but there's different ways of performing the Hajj. And this is an example in our Sharia of ikhtilaf al-tanawwu. An ikhtilaf within the Sharia which is acceptable because it is all authentically established in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. That the Prophet ﷺ, he legislated 3 types of rituals. It is ifrad, tamattu, and qiran. Right. So the 2 rituals of ifrad and qiran is only coming in with a hajj. And tamattu is when, and this is the type of ritual that most people that perform hajj intend for. It is when you assume ihram in the months of hajj, right, for hajj, but you come out of your ihram. And then, when the 8th of Dhul Hijjah comes, you make your intention to enter in the state of ihram again, but from within Makkah. I'll explain it again. So the best form of hajj, it is tamattu. And tamattu is gathering between umrah and hajj in the months of hajj. And the months of hajj is, as we mentioned last week, Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and Dhul Hijjah. So whoever comes into Makkah during this month and they intend to perform hajj, they will make tamattu. So they'll say, for example, the intention is to perform hajj and umrah. And they come into Makkah with an umrah, and they will perform the actions of umrah, which is ihram, tawaf, sa'i, and khalq, right? And shaving the head, which we'll get to. And they'll come out of ihram. And then when the 8th of Dhul Hijjah comes, they'll make an intention from within Makkah, then for hajj. And that is tamattu. So the Prophet ﷺ, they say, ahalla min al-baydah, that he made talbiyah, and he manifested the hajj ritual which he was going to do at this point. So the Prophet ﷺ, we know he only went in and he performed. Which type of hajj did the Prophet perform? He performed hajj only, he did not perform an umrah. Right? But the Prophet ﷺ did indicate in other evidences that if he had turned back, he would have did a different thing. So from this we understand that tamattu is the most virtuous form of hajj. Right? Tamattu is the most virtuous form of hajj. So the Prophet ﷺ then manifested his niyyah and he made the talbiyah. Right? He made the talbiyah. And by the talbiyah, we mean saying labbaik Allahumma labbaik. Right? And the scholars have differed with regards to the talbiyah. Right? Is it wajib or is it recommended? Some scholars have said that it is wajib to say the talbiyah at least once. What's the talbiyah? Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika laka labbaik, innal hamda wa ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lak. And the talbiyah is only legislated. Talbiyah is only legislated, right, at one occasion. And no other times. Is this dhikr something which is legislated? Right? When is it legislated? When you're on umrah or hajj, and when you're in a state of ihram. And it's legislated from the time when the person assumes the ihram up until they reach the Kaaba. Once they reach the Kaaba, there's no more talbiyah, except for the hajj. We'll discuss up until when it is recommended. So, the scholars have differed with regards to this. And the Prophet ﷺ ahalla bil hajj, meaning he basically raised his voice very loudly in doing the talbiyah. And this is the sunnah. The sunnah for males is to do the talbiyah bisawtin murtafi', with a loud voice. But the sunnah is to do it individually and not to do it in congregation, right? Jama'atan. Like all other adhkar is prescribed, is that we do it audibly at certain times. You have to be able to hear your adhkar, but not in congregation. So we don't wait for one person to say the talbiyah, then we all say after him. It is legislated for each person to do the talbiyah by themselves. And then the scholars derive something from this, that the Prophet also was on his ride and then he made his intention. They then discussed the issue concerning what is better. Is it better for the person to do what they refer to as the walking Hajj, or Hajj upon your mount or your ride? Because there were many Sahaba that accompanied the Prophet ﷺ on his farewell Hajj, but they did so walking. Right, they did so walking. And the scholars actually, they estimated how long it took them to get to Makkah. The Prophet took about 8 days to reach Makkah. 420 kilometers took them 8 days. And this is not something strange, because you read the seerah of the previous ulama, and you'll find that they performed Hajj and Umrah, and they said that we went Mashian. We went walking from Iraq, or from Palestine, or from wherever. So today we say that things have been made much easier for us. That 420 kilometers that you travel by bus, the bus ride can be anywhere between 6 and 8 hours. Even that is simplified today by way of the train. You use the train before? MashaAllah. It's easy. But then you're still going to find that people complain. Right? Wallah musta'an. So when you look at the struggles which the previous people went through, and we even say, we pay tribute to our forefathers also at times, is that people used to go to Hajj on ship. Right? Imagine that. Imagine us youngsters today going to Hajj on ship. And by that time it was different ships to today. It's not like luxury cruises. So the path has been made easy for us, but also we said, as the old people say, one can relate, maybe they say, die pad na Makkah raak al nouwer en nouwer. More expensive. But yet still for some it is still easy, alhamdulillah. Because people, mashallah, study, they became professional, they get approved, last minute they can decide I'm going. Right? So Hajj is made easy today, and we must always look at the difficulties of the people before us. So the Sahaba, some were walking. And we said, here the scholars discuss the issue. What is better, to do Hajj, Raqiban, or Mashian? This is something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in His book, where Allah as well said in Surah Al-Hajj, verse 27, وَأَذِّن فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ يَأْتُوكَ رِجَالًا وَعَلَى كُلِّ ضَامِرٍ يَأْتِينَ مِنْ كُلِّ فَجٍّ عَمِيقٍ. Allah told Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam to pronounce and proclaim the obligation of Hajj. Make the adhan for Hajj. And this adhan is not the adhan, right? This adhan, what is meant here, is the proclamation of the obligation of Hajj. And it is mentioned that when Nabi Ibrahim was given this command, he questioned himself with regards to how his voice would reach the people. Allah Azza wa Jal told him that it is upon you to convey, and it is upon us to make the call reach the people. And so it is mentioned that Allah Azza wa Jal leveled the earth and the mountains, and everybody was on the face of the earth heard the call of Nabi Ibrahim at that time. Allah said, يَأْتُوكَ رِجَالًا, and they will come, to Hajj. Rijalan, meaning walking. وَعَلَى كُلِّ ضَامِرٍ, and they will come on every mode of transport. Right? يَأْتِينَ مِنْ كُلِّ فَجٍّ عَمِيقٍ. So this proves that the Quran, it was already foretelling what will happen in the future. Because a dhamir can mean any type of mode of transport. So Allah Azza wa Jalla already mentioned that people will come by way of ship, they will come by way of car, they will come by way of planes, they will come ala kulli dhamirin. Upon every mode of transport, يَأْتِينَ مِنْ كُلِّ فَجٍّ عَمِيقٍ. So Ibn Kathir mentioned that this verse was used by the scholars to prove that Hajj Mashiyan liman qadira alayhi afdal min al-Hajj raqiban. And he said some scholars have used this verse as an evidence to prove that the person who performs Hajj walking is better than the person who performs Hajj by way of a mode of transport. He says because Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned in the sequence of the verse, He mentioned foot first. Rijalan wa ala kulli dhamirin. Then Allah mentioned upon every mode of transport. And لأن المشي فيه مشقة. Right? لأن لمن قدر عليه أفضل من الحج راكبا. نعم. And he says the majority of the scholars have taken the opinion that ar-rukub is afdal, that using a mode of transport is better. And this is what is in line with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Because the Prophet ﷺ performed Hajj upon his camel. So they said that this is better, to perform Hajj using a mode of transport. Alright? If the person has strength to do this. لأن الركوب أهون على له على أداء المناسك, because this would make it easy for him to perform the manasik, and this is what is stipulated, is that the person is able to perform the rituals in the best possible manner. And this is important to mention because some people, they tire themselves out on Hajj, right? Especially on the days of the 8th of Dhul Hijjah and the 9th on the day of Arafah. That some people do what is referred to as the walking Hajj. And some people are elderly, and some people are not fit enough, and some people are not hydrated. And what happens? They become sick. So we say that in relation to performing a walking Hajj or Hajj using transport, whatever is easy for the person, that is prescribed. But some scholars have said that using a transport is better. So why we're saying this is because some people skip the bus ride on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, which is the day of Arafah, when the sun rises. It is recommended for the people to make their way to Arafah. But some people opt to walk. And the people, they tire themselves out and they get sick because they believe that doing the walking Hajj is better. But we say that neither one is better, right? Whatever is easier for the person to do, the person should adopt that approach with regards to Hajj, Jabir ibn Abdullah then said, وَرَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ بَيْنَ أَظْهُرِنَا وَعَلَيْهِ يَنزِلُ الْقُرْآنُ وَهُوَ يَعْرِفُ تَأْوِيلَهُ وَمَا عَمِلَ بِهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ عَمِلْنَا بِهِ. Jabir ibn Abdullah then said, and the Prophet ﷺ, after he ahalla bil ihram, after the Prophet ﷺ uttered the talbiyah, he said the Prophet ﷺ was in our midst. And he says, وَعَلَيْهِ يَنزِلُ الْقُرْآنُ, and upon him the Quran was revealed. وَهُوَ يَعْرِفُ تَأْوِيلَهُ, and the Prophet ﷺ knew the interpretation of the Quran. وَمَا عَمِلَ بِهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ عَمِلْنَا بِهِ, and everything which the Prophet ﷺ practiced upon, we practice upon it. Everything which the Prophet practiced upon, we practice upon it. So the scholars mention, firstly, why did Jabir ibn Abdullah say this? He said this because to make clear a very, very important principle with regards to our religion. And that is at-ta'assi bin Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that we use the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as an example with regards to our religion. Whatever he did, alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, amilna bihi. We practice upon this. And this is the foundation with regards to the religion. And also in relation to a foundation with regards to Hajj also. And we mentioned this hadith that comes up over and over with regards to Hajj. The Prophet said, Khudu anni manasikakum. Take from me your Hajj rituals. So we'll see that whatever the Prophet did on Hajj, the Sahaba followed him, right? The Sahaba followed him. And whatever he did, alayhi salatu wasalam, they did. فَإِذَا طَافَ النَّبِي عليه الصلاة والسلام حول الكعبة واستلم الحجر وصلى خلف المقام كان التأسي والاقتداء به أن يفعل هذا الفعل. So the Prophet also circumambulated the Kaaba and he touched the black stone and he prayed behind the maqam of Nabi Ibrahim. كان التأسي والاقتداء به أن يفعل هذا الفعل. Simply following the Prophet ﷺ is what is intended by this, because this in of itself is worship. So the people would like to ask sometimes, for example, what is the wisdom behind touching the black stone? This is answered by Umar ibn Khattab, right? In a very, very famous saying, when he said, "Inni a'lam annaka hajarun, la tadur wa la tanfa, ولولا أني رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقبلك ما قبلتك." He said that indeed I know, and he addressed the black stone, that you are only a stone. لا تدر ولا تنفع. As some people touch the Kaaba seeking blessings, and touching the black stone seeking blessings, tabarruk. He said, لا تدر ولا تنفع. You cannot benefit and nor can you harm. And if I had not seen the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wasalam kiss you, then I would not have kissed you. So the only reason he did it was because the Prophet did it. And this is what we are talking about when we take the Prophet as a uswa, as an example with regards to worship. As opposed to the one, for example, from the sunnah, as we will see, is to perform your 2 raka'at after your tawaf behind the black stone. Behind the maqam of Nabi Ibrahim. Opposed to the person who simply finds himself in that place and he prays because it's convenient, because it's not a zahma. And the most zahma is behind the stone. Behind the maqam of Ibrahim. So he prays there simply because he finds the spot. The second person prays there because the Prophet also prayed there. So who has more reward? The one who followed the sunnah and followed the fact that the Prophet also did this. So Jabir ibn Abdullah said that the Prophet was amongst us. They saw his actions. وَعَلَيْهِ يَنزِلُ الْقُرْآنِ, and upon him the Quran was revealed. And he knew best its interpretation. وَمَا عَمِلَ بِهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ عَمِلْنَا بِهِ, and whatever he practiced upon, we practiced upon as well. So we're going to stop at this point, inshallah, where the Prophet made his intention and he professed the talbiyah, and Jabir ibn Abdullah said, فَأَهَلَّ بِالتَّوْحِيد, that the Prophet he made ihlal by tawheed. And what is meant by this is the utterance of the talbiyah, which in and of itself is a manifestation of tawheed. And the simple answer the scholars have given, that when the person say labbaik Allahumma labbaik, it means response after response. Ijabatan ba'da al-ijaba. The Mu'tamir and the Hajj responded to the call of Nabi Ibrahim, which Allah Azza wa Jalla made obligation upon them. And so they said, labbaik Allahumma labbaik. Oh Allah, ya am, oh Allah, ya am, responding to the obligation of Hajj and Umrah. Naktafi bihada. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.